November 22, 1963. A normal afternoon in Dallas, Texas. Crowds gathered, cameras flashed, the president smiled and waved. Then, gunshots. In just a few seconds, John F. Kennedy was fatally wounded in broad daylight. Panic erupted. People ran. No one understood what had just happened. Within hours, the world would be told a simple explanation: a lone gunman. Case closed. But what followed didn't bring clarity. It raised even more questions. Because witnesses heard different things, evidence didn't always line up, and the man accused of the crime would never stand trial. So what really happened that day in Dallas? And why, more than half a century later, are people still searching for answers? John F. Kennedy became president in 1961. At just 43 years old, he represented a new generation of leadership in the United States. Charismatic, confident, and widely popular, Kennedy brought a sense of optimism to the country. But behind that image, the world was dangerously unstable. The Cold War was at its peak. Tensions between the United States and the Soviet Union had brought the world to the edge of nuclear war. In 1962, the Cuban Missile Crisis nearly triggered a global catastrophe. Kennedy's decisions during that crisis helped avoid disaster, but they also placed him in direct opposition to powerful global forces. But this is where things get strange. Some historians believe Kennedy's policies created tension not only with foreign powers, but also within powerful institutions at home. By 1963, the United States was facing internal challenges as well. Civil rights protests were growing, political divisions were intensifying, and Kennedy was preparing for a difficult re-election campaign. Texas was a key state. So, in November 1963, Kennedy traveled to Dallas. On the morning of November 22nd, the presidential motorcade began its route through the city. Thousands of people lined the streets. The atmosphere was energetic and welcoming. Kennedy rode in an open-top limousine alongside First Lady Jacqueline Kennedy and Texas Governor John Connally. As the motorcade moved through downtown Dallas, it approached an area known as Dealey Plaza. The car slowed as it made a turn. Then, suddenly a sharp sound echoed through the air. Then another. And another. At first, many thought it was fireworks, but within seconds it became clear something was terribly wrong. According to the official account, the shots were fired from the Texas School Book Depository. Inside was Lee Harvey Oswald. Oswald was a former U.S. Marine with a complicated past. He had previously lived in the Soviet Union before returning to the United States. Witnesses later reported seeing a man in a window shortly before the shooting. Within minutes, police began searching the area. Oswald left the building shortly after the shots were fired. He was briefly stopped by a police officer but allowed to continue. But this is where things get strange. About 45 minutes later, a Dallas police officer named J.D. Tippit was shot and killed. Witnesses identified Oswald as the suspect. Soon after, Oswald was arrested in a nearby movie theater. Meanwhile, President Kennedy had been rushed to Parkland Hospital. Doctors worked desperately to save him, but the injuries were too severe. At 1 p.m., he was pronounced dead. The news spread rapidly across the United States and around the world. People watched in shock. Within hours, Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson was sworn in as president aboard Air Force One. The nation had lost its leader, and the search for answers had only just begun. To investigate the assassination, the government formed the Warren Commission. After months of investigation, the commission concluded that Oswald acted alone. It stated that he fired 3 shots from the 6th floor of the depository building. 2 bullets struck the president, 1 missed. The case, according to the official report, was closed. But this is where things get strange. Even before the report was released, many people had already begun to question its conclusions. One of the most debated aspects of the case became known as the magic bullet theory. According to this explanation, a single bullet caused multiple injuries. It entered Kennedy's back, exited through his throat, and then struck Governor Connally. The theory was used to explain how one shooter could have caused all the wounds in such a short amount of time. But this is where things get strange. Many critics argued that the path of the bullet seemed highly unlikely. To them, it raised more questions than answers. Another major point of controversy involved the grassy knoll. Several witnesses reported hearing shots from a different direction. Some claimed they heard gunfire from a small hill near the motorcade route. Others believed they saw smoke. This led to speculation that there may have been a second shooter. But this is where things get strange. Audio recordings analyzed years later suggested the possibility of more than 3 shots. However, these findings remain widely debated. Then came one of the most shocking moments in the entire case. 2 days after his arrest, was being transferred to another facility. As cameras broadcast the scene live, a man stepped forward and shot him. That man was Jack Ruby, died shortly after. But this is where things get strange. The only suspect in the assassination had been killed before he could stand trial. For many, this raised even more questions. Over time, numerous theories began to emerge. Some suggested involvement by organized crime, others pointed to intelligence agencies. Some speculated about foreign governments during the Cold War. Each theory attempted to explain the inconsistencies in the official narrative, but none have been definitively proven. Decades later, the assassination of John F. Kennedy remains one of the most investigated events in history. Thousands of documents have been released, multiple investigations have been conducted, yet the debate continues. Some believe the official explanation. Others remain unconvinced. What is certain is this. On November 22, 1963, the course of history changed in an instant. A president was lost, a nation was shaken, and a mystery was created that still has not been fully resolved. More than half a century later, people are still asking the same question: what really happened that day in Dallas?